Ed Stetzer, so good to see you here at the table. This is an interview I've been waiting for a long time. And thank you for saying yes
to
the invitation to come to Biola University and Talbot School of Theology, where you are our dean. And we are so glad that you accepted our invitation and God led you and Donna here, where your daughter is also a student at Biola, I might add.
Super happy on all counts.
Thank you. Well, tell us a little bit about in your life on the odyssey that you've been on. Why Talbot School of Theology at Biola, and why is this such a good fit for you? Because we know you're a good fit for us.
Well, it's been probably a weird journey to become the dean of the Talbot School of Theology. I started as a church planter. Donna and I moved to the inner city of Buffalo, New York to plant a church among the urban poor decades ago, and planted churches there, planted churches in Erie, Pennsylvania. And then I just started loving education. We planted our first church when we were too young, didn't have any seminary, graduated with an undergraduate degree from a college that was moving away from its Christian commitment, had a couple of religion courses, go up to Buffalo to plant a church, realized I need some training. So I started doing seminary work, finished a couple of master's degrees, went down the road, planted those other churches in Erie, did a DMin. Got called to be a professor for a season, did a PhD while I was there. And so I started getting into research, and that probably led to me. I ended up heading a church planning program at the North American Mission Board and being their director of research. Eventually served a decade at Lifeway, where I was the vice president of research, communications, some other areas. And then it was a twist and a turn. You know, I get this call from Wheaton College to lead the Billy Graham Center and later to be the founding dean of the School of Mission, Ministry, and Leadership. Found out I really like higher education leadership. I love seeing men and women trained in ministry for the good news, the good work of the gospel. So served there for 7 years. Wasn't a short stint, served there for 7 years, launched a school, had a great journey, and then we had a conversation. I think I align well theologically with the Talbot School of Theology. I think people aren't aware. This is the fifth largest multi-denominational seminary in the world. It's a very impactful. When I say seminary, there's a seminary program and there's an undergraduate program, but we can use those terms interchangeably at times. And just felt that I aligned well here. Really thankful for your leadership, our provost's leadership, and said, I want to put my next 10, 15 years here at Talbot.
Well, we're glad you're here. I don't know of many who are as well connected and aware of what's happening in not only the national scene for evangelicalism, but globally as well. So you know a lot about theological education. I think my last count, there are 257 accredited schools in the Association of Theological Schools. And as you look at the landscape of theological education, what is distinct, unique, standout-ish about Talbot?
Yeah, first, when you look across the landscape right now, and we're really blessed at Talbot to have a provost who is a seminary provost, to have a president who is engaged in seminary leadership, so that's a nice thing to have. But across theological education landscape, the big story is decline. And we find institutions, we don't need to name our sister institutions, we want them to succeed, to grow in the grace of the gospel, to train women and men for ministry. But what we're seeing is decline across the board, and we've actually experienced some decline at Talbot. Now, let me say clearly that we're a healthy institution. That's part of the answer to your question. Why did I come to Talbot? Because Talbot's not in an unhealthy institute. It's got a healthy culture. It's got healthy theology. It's got healthy relationships. It's experienced some decline that we want to see a turnaround on. But around the higher education is struggling in general, but seminaries maybe even more so. So I was attracted to the fact that Talbot is rooted in a university, Biola University, deeply committed to being a part of this university family. I was encouraged because it was clear where it was theologically. We use the terms conservative evangelical to describe and define ourselves, and I think that's helpful in the world in which we are. Or when you look at the theological spectrum, we're evangelicals, probably on the conservative side, and using the phrase conservative evangelical to describe ourselves. Not a political statement, but a theological one. And I think that matters really where we are. I would also say, too, that, Talbot is already a world-class theological institution. I'll say seminary for the grad school, undergrad. But it's not as well known. When I tell people it's the 5th largest multi-denominational seminary in the world, they're surprised. And when I tell them, it's larger than wonderful schools like Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and, I kind of place it where it is in size, people are surprised. So I think the Talbot story, and all of our alumni would know the Talbot story, and maybe people who are connected to our alumni would know the Talbot story. But what's interesting is a lot of people don't know the Talbot story. So for good or for ill, I'm kind of a loud person. I'm a New Yorker. You're a Bostonian, so we've got a little bit, or you got some Boston in you. I want to tell the story of the amazing things that Talbot School of Theology is doing. So all those things sort of align theologically, stage of life for where I was. I started this school at Wheaton and really learned to love it. But here I come into a much larger environment, and I think the opportunity is great here. Our Talbot alumni know about this. Friends of Talbot and Biola know about the school. But I want to tell a whole lot of people, particularly the globe. We're on the Pacific Rim. Yep. And what an opportunity. A place, being in LA County is already a global influencer. Let's do that for theological education as well.
Yeah, I know the founders had that in mind when they selected this city.
There's a reason.
Which was on the brink of becoming one of the most globalized cities in the world, which it is today. So for those who don't know a lot about Talbot, it is an embedded seminary in a comprehensive university. You are still relatively new in the role. But
I don't think relatively. I'm just new. So
share some of your hopes and aspirations as we look to the future, because when we selected you and you said yes to the invitation, we did so because you are a man of vision and growth and dreams and strength, all within the orthodoxy that is so rooting us here at Talbot.
Yeah, so I think we have to think in terms of maybe 2 areas of focus. One of them is, of course, our undergraduate program. Students who come to Biola University, they get a Bible minor. They take 30 hours. One of the reasons that for me as a dad, I was so glad my daughter chose to come here at Biola University long before we started a conversation. So I think it matters in a world where many Christian institutions maybe are unsure of how they want to articulate their Christian commitment, of what that looks like, that students come from Biola University, the university, not just Talbot, Biola University, with a robust engagement in theology and the Bible. And in the world in which we live today, confused and compromised, we need the grounding in God's Word. So that's a passion to see that continue. At the graduate level, and we talk about seminary, but it's a diversity of programs, from apologetics programs, a robust spiritual formation, Talbot in Espanol, in Korean, marriage and family therapy. And, some of our alumni may not even be aware of the diversity of offerings that we have, or even for that matter, our doctoral programs, where some of our alumni might be saying, should I re-engage? And we have DMin, PhD, and more. So I think for me, part of what I hope to see is to see what we already have here. I'm not coming into Talbot thinking that actually we need some sort of substantive cultural or even academic change. I want to tell the story better. I want to engage more students. But I think we have good, solid foundation for where we are. And I think where we go for the future will be determined by how we engage the cultural moment, right, with biblical, faithful ministry preparation in a incredibly shifting cultural moment. And let me also add, too, part of my vision is I love that we're doing this in California. Now, I say that because not everybody is excited about states like California, Illinois, or New York. So I grew up in New York. Okay, I've been serving in Illinois. These are not bastions of evangelical faith and practice. But I think that in many, culture tends to come from the coasts inland. And if current trends continue, and that's what trends tend to do, that's why they're trends, we're going to find ourselves in a more secular environment and a more resistant environment. So come to California, and again, you can also study online, you can study in place, things of that sort, but come experience training in a place that knows what it looks like to live with winsome conviction, to have a hard center and soft edges, as you've talked about here, and to show and share the love of Jesus in a really broken and divided world.
Some of the folks watching and listening and reading this are either future Talbot students or current Talbot students or graduates of Talbot School of Theology. Let's zoom out a little bit to the landscape of congregational life. What are, in summary, in this cultural moment, some of the issues that pastors are facing, and what's some just avuncular advice you can give them about what they should be doing or reading or thinking about in this day and age that we are in.
Yeah, my first piece of advice would be to try to use the word avuncular in all the sentences that you can. But beyond that, I think I was sitting down recently in Wheaton. I've just moved here 2 months ago, so I was sitting down here in Wheaton with a recent graduate at Cambridge, evangelical, connected there at some of the evangelical programs that are there, pastoring a wonderful Presbyterian church. And we were just kind of talking about ministry today, and he said, I got my MDiv from one of the well-known Presbyterian Reformed seminaries. I got my PhD at Cambridge, and I got to say, most of the things people are asking me about in church right now are not things that I covered in seminary. They're asking, and partly because just the times have shifted so quickly. So I think what I would encourage pastors and church leaders to do is to acknowledge that the acceleration of change, coupled with a cultural convulsion, unlike anything we've seen since the 60s, has caused cultural issues to accelerate and also to be more divisive. And so I would say that for you to be engaged and aware of some of what's going on, I mean, the last time I sat in this chair where we're recording right now was for we were having the Thinking Biblically podcast. And I would encourage people to listen to things like that, where we have to think biblically about issues that for most of us, for most of our seminary grads, for most of our alumni, if you went to school 10 years ago, conversations about gender identity were not maybe on the radar. The level of 5 years ago, maybe 6 years, 7 years ago, the level of cultural division wasn't where we are now. But here's the thing. I'm just convinced that the moment we're in doesn't pause the mission we're on. The same truths, Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, even so send I you, apply in this cultural moment. But I do think it's a time of ongoing equipping. And we do that here, of course, through, people can go on to additional education. But I think for all of us, we have to remain learners in this cultural moment. We came of age in a time when everybody was trying to engage culture by being more engaging, by being more relevant, things of that sort. And I think missiologically, it's a wise thing to engage culture in biblically faithful and culturally appropriate ways. I would say that we spent a lot of energy, people in the 80s and the 90s. I think we probably need to spend an equal or more amount of energy figuring out the cultural moment and then seeking to live out biblical truths in the midst of both a accelerating cultural shift and a remarkable cultural convulsion that we're walking through.
And we are. Thank you. That was a thoughtful answer.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome. I don't say this disparagingly, but there are lots of options for pastors to get training, formal and informal, online, church-based, remote. What's the case for Talbot among all of those options? Or what does an embedded seminary at a university with a residential faculty, with lots of online options as well, I might add, but what is the case that you would build for Talbot School of Theology among all the options that are out there? Many of them are super low cost and easy to achieve.
Sure. And I think we can look at them one at a time. First of all, for many people, now, of course, we're talking to a lot of people who are watching who are friendly towards who we are. They're going to be alumni. They might be interested in open students, possible students, those kinds of things. But for local churches, there's been a huge shift in church practices away from engaging kind of a traditional theological education, right? So I was talking to Greg Strand, who's the head of credentialing for the Evangelical Free Church in America. A pretty standard would be you to do an MDiv, and this would be what you'd have. Or in some denominations, still require the MDiv, and this is what you'd have. A lot of churches now have just taken that training on themselves. And I would say, too, I think it's good that it's closer to the local church. You're going to hear in the days, weeks, and months ahead that Talbot's going to be growing closer to the local church, finding ways and options in different communities and cities and churches to offer theological education in place. I would say that one of the distinctives that actually pursuing in general, let's not talk about Talbot, but pursuing something that's a prescribed course of study, is that you're actually learning things that Christians have kind of thought through and worked through for 2,000 years. And with theological education, it goes back centuries, to say these are things you should know. Yeah. And so I think having somebody, a professor, say to you, we're going to do a course in theology, and you should read these 5 books, and you're going to start working through a systematic theology, and who knows, maybe it's Miller Erickson, maybe it's Michael Bird, something you're going to work through a systematic theology. I need you to know what Christology is when somebody has questions about who Jesus is and what it means to be fully God and fully man. Well, if you just get trained in a local church, you may never wrestle with that issue. But for 2,000 years, Christians have said there's some training that's probably helpful. So I think to engage that. Now, you can engage that in different ways. Primarily now at Talbot, you can engage that by coming here. And there's something powerful about being in class on a weekly basis in a residential institution. And again, you can do that in California. We've got both wonderful churches that are partnering and engaging. So if you come here, you get plugged into a local church, and wonderful in residence theological education. I really want to encourage people to do that. Remember, undergrads do that as part of their program at Biola, but grads do this as well. People all over the world come here. So there's that. And then there is the online option as well. Now, the online option, pedagogically, we find, has similar outcomes. You learn similarly in that because it's not... I think, if a lot of our alumni maybe went here and then they're like, well, online, isn't that like they send those VHS tapes when, well, not anymore. So it's got a whole different pedagogy that's been tested. And we have, and there's all kinds of, you've even mentioned it, there's all kinds of online programs. We're not actually trying to race to the bottom and say, we're going to just have this program. We're going to have some grad student who doesn't have a degree teaching it. You're going to have to do multiple choice tests, and you're not going to engage with people. We're actually saying an online experience at the Talbot School of Theology has our professors, and you engage with them, and there's community, and there's what we call asynchronous or synchronous. There's asynchronous experiences that happen on your own, but then there's synchronous experience as well. And now increasingly, you'll hear more and more about us launching modular and hybrid programs where maybe you're in a city. I shouldn't drop cities right now, but maybe you're in a city in the Midwest. Maybe you're in the city in the East Coast. Maybe you're in the city in the Southwest where we can actually offer a class or two a year there. You do some online. You come to our campus some. Everyone loves to walk the Biola campus.
They do.
Particularly in January when they come from Minnesota. So again, I would say that the prescribed course of study actually has shown to be the kind of shaping. And, we also have this wonderful Institute of Spiritual Formation. We're uniquely focused on spiritual formation. In a world where there's so many pastoral failures, we want you to be rooted in God's Word and grounded in spiritual formation. So that's, I kind of made the case a long way around, but I do think, because remember, I love Jesus, I love the Bible. I had 2 courses in Bible or Christianity from this school, and I went to Buffalo, New York, and people started asking me questions, and I said, I need to learn more, and I'm deeply thankful. And I hate to sound like an old man, but I drove from Buffalo, New York to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania every weekend for 5 years, uphill, without shoes in the snow. I slept on the floor of an office building in a sleeping bag because I wanted to get my master's in divinity, and it was transformative for me. So I'm somebody who went out without a degree and then said this would be transformative for me and for others as well.
Great, thank you. Let's end with a zoom out question to the this cultural moment, and with the divisiveness and tribalism and vitriol that is in politics and media, even in higher education. Of course, it's worked its way into the church. What is your hope for Talbot graduates dispositionally when they leave the seminary, graduate, and go into congregational life or nonprofits, or they might be doing it for self-enrichment to be back in the corporate world?
And we got all kinds of space now.
Yeah, what's your hope dispositionally for them?
Yeah, I think we live in a world where far too many Christians have been discipled by their cable news choices and spiritually shaped by their social media. And I think ultimately that has produced a people who don't see through a gospel lens, but see through an ideological lens. And, I think there are ramifications to what we believe, and some people say those ramifications are political or ideological, and I understand that. I talked about that in my interview right at this table, where we kind of pressed in a little bit on how do we engage in the political moment, because things like life are political, and they have political ramifications. And so what I would say is I want us to shape the kind of people who engage the world like Jesus, who doesn't see winsome conviction. That's a phrase we use around here. We have a whole winsome conviction project. They don't see winsome conviction as some sort of strategy that now that it's failed, we actually need a new strategy. No, they see it as the way of Jesus. They're able to articulate their convictions, and that's not always easy, and the backlash can be difficult. I wrote a story defending one of our sister universities and their view of biblical ethics in USA Today, and I cannot tell you the amount of harassing phone calls and threats that I received in doing so. But I think we need to be able to express those convictions to disciple God's people to understand those convictions. And they also, not just our graduates, not just pastors, to engage as winsome ambassadors. That's what I called it in Christians in the Age of Outrage, my book, that they can engage the world as winsome ambassadors. I think that's the call of all Christians. Jesus said, as the Father has sent me, even so send I you. So we go with the truth of Jesus, but we also go in the way of Jesus. And going in the way of Jesus doesn't change because the culture's changed. In many ways, we've lost our home field advantage. You want to see what that looks like? Come to California with us and see what that looks like. We've lost our home field advantage. But I've read the end of the book. Jesus wins. We're still called on mission. We still have freedom to proclaim the good news of the gospel. Our graduates are already doing that. Our alumni are already doing that. We're looking forward to seeing more. See that transformation. Focus on a disciple-making strategy that roots people in God's word, not the cultural whims of the day, and then show and share the love of Jesus in a broken and hurting world.
That's it. Always be prepared to defend the hope you have within you, but do so with gentleness and respect.
Amen.
It's truth. It's grace. It's Ed Stetzer at the table with me. End of a conversation. Thank you again for coming here with Donna from the Midwest to Southern California, and we look forward to a long, fruitful, and life-giving relationship here at Biola University and Talbot School of Theology. Ed Stetzer.
Thank you.